Hello and welcome to the New York Empire podcast. I'm Dan Hilton, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by one of the great Ultimate Minds, assistant coach of the Empire, 2017 USA Ultimate Hall of Famer, David Blau. David, thank you so much for joining the show.
Dan, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, well, most of the Ultimate community may know you as a man on the sidelines, full of wisdom, but I'm not sure how many really understand what role you had in, I want to say Ultimate in New York, but Ultimate Frisbee in general, the greater game at large, and just how much winning you did as a player. I don't think people even appreciate or understand that. I mean, we're talking the younger generations. But before we go back in time, this is the first podcast, or the last podcast, before the home opener this Friday at Joseph F. Facina Field up in New Rochelle. So, Coach, whether we like it or not, missing the entire season will be at the forefront of a lot of discussions this year about the COVID break and all those things. So from what you've seen in practice, how long do you think it took for those players to shake off that rust?
Less time than I thought it would. I think in terms of the Empire personnel, I think there was a good amount of training going on during COVID. There are issues of timing and certain elements of lead passing to full speed cutters that may have been a little rusty, but that came back pretty quickly. I think that our trainer has been on top of making sure that we didn't overdo it at the beginning. So we haven't really had major injury at all. A little bumps and bruises along the way for a couple people, but for the most part, we're a healthy team.
And New York Empire are the defending champs. They were 2019 winners, but there's tons of changes in personnel and some big changes in personnel this season. So what do you think of some of the new players and what they'll add to account for the losses of? And this is only a time of recording, so rosters are never final until they're final. I want to make that very clear. But at the moment, it seems that Harper Garvey, Grant Lindsley, Bo Kittredge, and a few others will not be joining the team this year. So I would say, how do you think the team, by and large with the new players, is going to look just a bit different than it did in 2019?
Well, there have been personnel changes all over the league.
Yeah.
So, we're seeing some different rosters in a lot of places. As far as the Empire goes, we lost some marquee names that can really do some amazing things on the field, but we picked up some marquee names that can do amazing things on the field, and we picked up some unknowns that can do amazing things on the field. So all in all, I think we are going to have a different look because some of the players that we picked up play the game and their strengths are a little different than some of the people that we lost. But all in all, I think when you look at our whole roster, we're okay. It's going to be challenging, I think, more based on some of the changes we'll see in our opponents than the changes on our roster. I mean, Grant Lindsley is a great player. Harper Garvey is a defensive, is a very difficult puzzle for a lot of defenses to solve because he activates parts of the field that people don't normally cover. And Bo is, Bo is lining up against the Yankees. You see the pinstripes and you think you're going to lose. So he losing that is, you can't replace someone with Bo's experience. But we'll do our best.
Yeah, and it's obviously when it comes to the rest of the league, one of the teams you'll be playing this year in the Boston Royal is a new team completely. So if you think that the Empire have got to make changes and personnel changes, well, what about an entire new team of personnel and trying to fit all that together? So of course, the rest of the league, as you said, going through a ton of changes.
I mean, there are changes all over the league. It should be very interesting. We're playing DC on Friday. We can't even scout them because there are very few people from their offensive line that we're going to see again. I think over 50% of their offensive line is changed.
Yeah, and I think even from my perspective as a broadcaster, from your perspective as a coach, after that first week and all those games around the league go up on AUDL TV, I assume all the coaches obviously are going to be hitting that tape as fast as they can because, again, this is the first look of all of your opponents throughout the season and scouting them all throughout week one. But even with personnel for other teams, changes will come along as weeks go on and players join, especially there are teams with we'll say collegiate players who will be joining a little later, but we'll see how much they affect it. By and large, I want to go back to, we're going to start the tease, and I think most of this podcast should be about not only you as a player, but kind of your impact on Ultimate as a whole. And I want to do my due diligence to educate people about that. But before we go back in time, I want to stay here and kind of give a teaser to that. When you look at the Empire, and this can be this season, this could be when you began working with them, this could be your entire time in connection with the Empire, what player or players, either on the Empire, and I'm even going to extend it to around the league, do you see yourself in? And I guess what I'm asking, are there other players that remind you of the James Worthy of Ultimate, as you've been called before?
It's hard to answer that question. I mean, when I watch certain players, I see elements of myself. There's not one that I would say that guy really plays like me. I mean, offensively, I see Jeff Babbitt covers the field a lot like I used to do, but I was nowhere the defender that Jeff is. I just wasn't able to do some of the things that he can do. But offensively, I'd say we play the game pretty similarly in that able to chew up a lot of yards and pretty solid on in turning around and throwing the disc and keeping a very high percentage of completions.
Yeah, so well, the last one before we go back in time. Another one of the big important things you've done is being a youth coach for quite a few years. Are the pros more or less challenging, you think, than the little ones from day to day and practice to practice?
It's much more challenging to coach youth than it is to coach pros. I mean, because you already have this solid base of passion in the sport. People have really decided to dedicate themselves to it. Coaching kids, little kids, is great, but it's a whole different ballgame. You have to really be careful. You can do a lot of damage when you don't even expect to. If you can turn somebody off. So you really have to be careful. And at the pro level, that's really not going to happen. These people have already built a base of love for the game, and they just want to get better. And it's a different kind of challenge. It's not as difficult.
Well, since we are talking about little ones, I think it's time to go all the way back now, at least to the Cornell Buds of the 1985-86 seasons. How did being a two-time semifinalist in college prepare you for your club career that was to follow?
Well, we never look back at those seasons as successes because we lost in the semifinals. And I think what it did was it impressed upon me the small demarcation between winning and losing, and how a little bit of focus in certain areas and certain times in the game can be the difference between winning and losing. So I really felt that both of the times that we went to college nationals and went down to the semifinals, we were, potentially championship quality. We just had bad moments at bad times and ended up losing. And that was something that, for the most part, when I got out of college and joined New York Ultimate, we were able to, be on the right side of those close games and do the things we needed to do to win.
Yeah, I mean, the formation of New York, or New York Ultimate, as it was called, was all about winning. Can you explain the formation of New York, from the ashes, if you will, of Kaboom and Spot? Because it is kind of an unorthodox way of the purpose of putting that team together was purely winning. It seemed like allegiances and all those things. It was all about just victories.
Yeah, well, it was in 1986. Kaboom had done. They got to the finals of nationals in 85, and then they got rolled in 86. And I had graduated from college, and in 86, when I graduated from college, there were a lot of good college players. I went to Cornell with John Gewurz, and Walter Vanderschaft came out of UVM, and Mike Nevins came out of UMass, and Amos was his teammate, and there were just a bunch of young guys, and we all joined Spot. So, and Spot had a couple of, some really good veterans too. But we were a good team, and Kaboom was a good team, and it was really Pat King who approached me after '86 and said, I want to form a new team, and it was all about getting the best guys in the city on the same team and being able to compete nationally. Um, and it was his dream to dominate. And we didn't really know exactly what we had. And when we put the team together, we put it together in a pretty interesting way. We didn't choose the people from Spot to bring to the team. We chose the people from Kaboom that we wanted to join the team, and the guys from Kaboom chose the people from Spot, and we had a couple of vetoes, and we came up with a team. And then Dan Weiss, who played with the West Coast team from the Bay Area, who had Flying Circus, who had won nationals, he came to New York. And I remember at our first team meeting, Dan Weiss said, this is great. We've got a lot of talent here, but it's going to take a couple of years before we're able to put it together and really compete for a national title. And we won our first year. We beat Chicago in the finals 21-13. And we got in the huddle afterwards, and somebody reminded Danny that he said it was going to take several years, and here we were winning our first national championship.
And one of the ways,
if you ask anyone on New York, they will tell you that the reason that we won multiple national championships was '88, our second year, when we collapsed against the Zone, against South Bay Tsunami in the semifinals. And it was really that loss that fueled the next 5 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, too, that one of those main reasons why you hit the ground running was, the team is basically credited with inventing pull plays as we know it, which is something that to go to modern times, that the Empire used to great effect when you have a weapon like a Ben Yacht out on your O-line. So when you were inventing those, not that you invented pull plays per se, but as you were going through what Ultimate had seen as some of the most complex pull plays, yet very simple, it was all about 3-4 throws. How did those come about?
Well, it's hard to really go back and say who invented what. There was a lot of things that we did offensively that kind of came from the Stanford offense, which had been around for a while, and people were running sort of standard 3 or 4 men strings. But what we did was we took it to the next level. Like, if the second or third guy, if it breaks down, what do we do? So we had 3 or 4 man plays, but we had fills. So if the second guy didn't get it, then the short fill, and the short fill would go to the deep fill. And so we had, we codified an approach to our offense, which was very effective. And as it started to become a little bit more well known, and people really started to poach lanes, then we took it to the next level and started showing plays that looked like what we normally did, but then we would reverse field and just go the opposite direction. So that was a challenge, and frankly one that we were pretty good at, was to stay innovative for several years and try to stay a few steps ahead of our competition.
And you did do so, being the U.S. national champs, 87, as you said, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93. So there was a 5-peat after the loss that you mentioned to Tsunami from the Bay Area in 1988. If you had to stack all of those 6 national championship winning teams against one another, when would you say that the team was at its very peak, or what was the best of the bunch, even though it was very similar personnel all throughout that era?
Well, there was like a core of guys that were there for all of them, basically.
Yeah.
But then we had people coming in, and I'd say in terms of the most talent around the edges was probably '89. We had a bunch of people that only played, a couple of years here and there, but that team was really quite good top to bottom.
Yeah, and oddly enough, the '89 team. Well, I guess that '89 team was the one that wound up winning world champions in 1990. That's how they qualified to it. So world champions in 1988, beating Sweden in the final in Belgium, 1990, 1991, 1993. Which was the toughest of those world championships?
88.
The Sweden one. That's what I figured you would say, but
And largely because we went there pretty sure that nobody would be able to give us a game.
mhm.
And we were really enjoying ourselves. We had people, we had a guy who, left Belgium, went to Amsterdam overnight, and then came back the next morning for the game. I mean, we just were not, we didn't think we were going to be tested. And we almost lost it all.
Yeah, and I think it was Dan Erickson, right? Was the name, and as well as Paul Erickson.
Danny played great.
Yeah.
But it was really, uh, there was really Dave Matheson and Ken Dobbins both made blocks that got us back in that game and gave us a victory. But it was not looking good.
Yeah, and especially those world champions are a reminder of just the big, again, I think for you too, standing on the Empire sidelines, seeing what is the huge difference between the way when you would travel for those world championships to the way that even, stateside, that teams are traveling and the AUDL was built. And we're talking economically too, that obviously for you guys then it was everything was on your own dime. You're going to Europe on your own dime. You're going to Florida. You're going to Canada. You're going everywhere you had to. And yeah, certainly. I mean, how many times for not even the Empire? And I know that obviously a younger generation doesn't want to hear over and over again about some of the things that you've been through. But as far as the experience even of travel, what have you been able to instill with the younger Empire players? Just about kind of what it takes to be able to have to travel and go with the flow when it comes to difficult places to play.
Well, yeah, I mean, the players have it better now.
Yeah.
Certainly in the AUDL, but even in my experience looking at the overall club division as well, they have their act way more together than we did. Everyone was kind of on their own to make sure we would just be in some foreign country and hope we'd see our teammates at the field. We weren't really traveling as a team, and nobody was really in charge of those logistics the way people take responsibility for them now. As New York went on, we had a lot of players with a certain amount of professional success. So we had some funds, and we weren't, this wasn't the dark ages. We did establish a nonprofit organization, and we raised some money to help us travel overseas. But it was definitely a little bit more off the seat of our pants, by the seat of our pants.
And when we do talk about funds, can you think back to the Jose Cuervo business that had come about and the ways that we'd say, I think corporate sponsorship and at least say corporate support is much more understood as necessary in today's game as opposed to then, when again the Jose Cuervo was and then Ken Domas has said himself that it was unusual for the time, and yet you see that corporate support now, and it makes sense with the direction the Ultimate is going.
Yeah, I mean, it made sense then too, and I think you still have today. There are people that think that getting money involved in the game takes away certain aspects of the game, and there were people back then that felt the same way. But there was a large number of people that said, "This is great. We want to play in front of. We want more exposure. We want more legitimacy. We want really less responsibility. Give us observers. I don't want to watch my feet when I'm trying to make a catch." And a lot of the same things you hear today. Those arguments are kind of just recycled today, same ones that we had back then. But overall, I remember when Cuervo came, they had just had good success with beach volleyball, and we were concerned that they were going to put our sport on sand and have us playing bathing suits and that kind of stuff. But they certainly weren't doing that at the time. They were, they were open to being forward thinking in terms of having some unique rules in terms of they had something called the gold shot, which was a 2-point shot,
Mm-hmm.
which was, which ended up delivering a lot of drama to those two Cuervo championships, which both came down to 2-point shots in order to allow a team to get back in the game. So, but overall, I think it's true that most of the teams and most of the players weren't really ready or willing to kind of toe the line that you needed to toe in order to put a positive face forward on the whole sport. So they walked away from us at the time. But there were certainly a lot of people that wished they hadn't.
Yeah, it does seem that with Ultimate, in the discussions we have, is the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think across a lot of different topics, that seems to be one of the through lines. So I would go back to kind of talking about on the field. And as much as you did have that 5-peat and that 6 total championships of that dynasty, it wasn't without challengers. So what are the odds you think that the future rivalry with the Boston Glory, how do you think that compares to the rivalry with Steve Mooney and Titanic from Boston, who themselves would go on to win 9 national championships in a row with Dog? And as far as that Boston-New York rivalry, I guess what was that rivalry, or how can you explain it then? And how do you think it's going to fit with the Empire and Boston Glory today? Any parallels?
Well, there's always going to be a certain amount of tension between Boston and New York. If you happen to have two teams that are closely matched, it will get magnified because of the proximity of the two cities, et cetera, et cetera. I will tell you when I was in it, when we were playing against Boston back in those days, we had a tremendous amount of respect for them as a team, a healthy amount of fear of them as players and as a team and things that they could do. We never, ever thought we could mail it in and beat Boston. We always had to be ready to play them. As years have passed, and I look back at some game footage of New York versus Boston, it looks a little different to me in that they had amazing players, but they did not have our depth. And so when I watch us play Boston, it never seems quite as close now as it did then, because I just see us wearing them down, and so we didn't really think in terms of, well, we're making investments in the second half by working them so hard in the first half. That's sort of a more modern thought. Hey, it's okay. It's a tie game. They're taking all these passes to score. We're scoring very few. This is going to end up building and giving us an advantage later in the game. But when you watch it now, it's much clearer to me that was what was going on. We were scoring in 4. They were scoring in 10. They had to get it back and put it in a few times, and we were, pretty clean. And sure enough, as the second half wore on, we usually were able to build and take a lead.
And one of the lines that Pat King had even said prior to one of those really good games against Boston was, they have 7 on their O-line and we have 25 men on our D-line. And I think that obviously
that's it. We were deeper. We were deeper. But they had some, they had great talent. They just didn't have as many.
Yeah, of course, Steve.
And back then it was definitely a little bit more marathon than it is today. We were playing games to 17, 19, and 21. There were no caps. There were no time caps really in terms of tournaments the way they are now. So we could have a 3-hour game.
Yeah, and as you watch again, there's only so much footage that is still available from those days, unfortunately. But when it came to the media that was surrounding your team, which there was the Sports Illustrated article, there was and I think unfortunately, a lot of the younger generations just know the clip from the Amazing Games episode. You knew where I was going about the priorities, and Ken Dalmas has talked about that before. But yeah, what was the role you think that media did play, and your guys' relationship with it, understanding that you were making Ultimate serious in a way that it had never been before. And then you look at, I guess this is inside baseball for me because it's, being part of media and the way that we're covering it now and the seriousness at least the way I try to do my job and the seriousness involved in that.
Well, yeah, the coverage was nothing like it is today. We were super serious about what we were doing. And, we weren't the only team that was super serious about what we were doing. All the top teams, for the most part, were. And I think we had, I think the story of New York and Boston and the juxtaposition of Kenny and Steve Mooney, both from their personas and their physical presences. One was so tall, one was not. One was so thin, one was. Yeah, it just was a really good story, and I think anybody that got close to the game, it was very easy to focus on that because it was dramatic. So there was a lot of that.
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, Kenny Dobbins, let's say the last chapter, the last part of this episode that we do, I do want to play a little bit of word association. So I am going to name some of your old teammates from New York, and I either want one word and then an explanation of the player and who that person is, because as I was going through that list and the roster, we only have so much time, so I only got to pick a few. But these are true legends of Ultimate, not just New York Ultimate, but the seriousness and the level of competition that now exists. I mean, these really are pioneers to that. That we're also building on things from even the 70s, right? So from the 70s to the 80s, as Ultimate involved in the seriousness and the competition from the club game. Again, it's not just these gentlemen, but that New York team had men that truly had a lasting impact on the sport. So again, I'm going to say a name. You give me, for younger players, try to sum up who that player was in either one word or a few sentences. And we're going to start with, of course, Kenny Dobbins.
Fierce.
Yeah. So I guess to say what made a man who was 5'6", and as you mentioned, kind of built like a fire hydrant. So when you say fierce, I think even in the modern game, there is no parallel to Kenny Dobbins and the intensity of which he played.
I'd say that's true. I mean, the Kenny, first of all, yes, Kenny was short and he was muscular, but he was a really good athlete, an extremely coordinated guy, and certainly able to throw his body around and survive that type of play in a way that not many people are. And I say survive that type of play to a guy who lacerated his kidney and got his knee, blew out his knee, and did a bunch of other things, but still, at the rate that he threw his body around, people would not have been able to last as long as Kenny lasted. He was pretty durable, all things considered. But he, I watched Kenny really develop. I think at the beginning in '87, Kenny was an amazing cutter, middle of field or deep, and by '93. He could still do that, but he was a great handler. He was touching the disc all the time. But he was an all-court player. He had a complete game. Certainly by the later part of his career, he could hurt you in a lot of different ways. There was no, you couldn't really take anything away from him.
Yeah, I mean, and I can confirm from firsthand experience, I actually played on your team back in, it was a summer league up in Woody, up in Westchester in 2011. And even at the age of 50 plus, Kenny Dobbins was still laying out head level, neck level, chest level. So I can confirm that athleticism, as much as
but only late in the game.
Right.
When it was close.
Right. And of course, that's much more than I think most of us expect to do at 50 though.
Right.
So, all right. So how about Pat King?
Intelligent winner, and there's again so much to say about Pat King. Pat was an enormous motor. I mean, something people don't know about Pat King is Pat King's brother guy named Creighton King. And Creighton King was the Pikes Peak Challenge champion for many years out west. Pikes Peak, that's a really major endurance event where people basically run up Pikes Peak.
Yeah.
And Creighton owned that race for years. He was a really well-known ultra endurance athlete, right at the beginning of that sport, really. And Pat had that type of endurance, plus a good amount of speed, plus very coordinated. So Pat, again, and also for the game back then, again, where you're playing 7 games in a weekend to win a tournament, at that 7th game, Pat was going like it was the first game. He just was tireless and a really good thrower. Again, a really great all-around game.
Mm-hmm.
And smart.
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys, the next one on our list is considered one of the greatest all-around players ever, and that's Skip Kuhn.
Yeah, Skip. Skip was also Skip. I live up in Katona now, and the high school here is John Jay. And when I played with Skip up until the end, he still owned the mile record for John Jay High School. So another, right out of the gate, great runner, fast, great endurance, and a great frisbee player. Skip had every throw, and tireless and fast as could be, and a real competitor.
All right, so I've got 3 more left on our list. Well, 3.5 more on our list. But how about Dennis Kribber-Warson?
Dennis, Dennis was an incredible talent. And people don't know this about Dennis. Dennis was sort of a late bloomer. He joined New York in our first year. And I think between 87 and 93, our last year, Dennis probably grew 3 or 4 inches and gained 30 or 40 pounds. And you remember how thin he was at the end. So he really, blossomed into this, blue chip athlete, but he didn't start that way. So, by the end, the guy was getting up well over 11 feet to pull discs down, and he also could lay it out. And he had, he had a lot of whip, and he had tremendous range on his throws from all sides.
And then almost at the other end of this, at least at the other end of the height spectrum, was John Gerwich.
Yeah, John Gewirtz. John Gewirtz was also an unusual player. I mean, I think he was the best person defender in the sport for many years. And, whenever we played the other top teams, John covered their best handler. And his job was to, neutralize or to, come close to neutralizing some of the best players in the game. And it didn't matter if it was, a 5'10" guy from Chicago or if it was a 6'7" guy from Boston. And John, we would have races and who was the fastest on the team. We had fast guys on the team. But if there was a disc floating out in the distance, no one closed on it like John. He just had an ability for in-game speed. I've seen guys who have incredible speed, but they don't have in-game speed. John had great speed, but his in-game speed was, truly elite. He also was tired. I mean, John's another example of kind of a freakish athlete. John was living in Seattle probably in 1994, 95. He'd never been a distance runner, and he decided that he was going to run the marathon in Seattle, trained a little bit, and broke 3 hours. Yeah. Just not common stuff.
What about Bob DeMann?
Bob is someone who Uh, he he's widely considered as the best of everything on New York. Like it didn't matter if we were throwing a baseball or a football, Bob was the best at it. If people wanted to go out and play a little frisbee golf, Bob was the best at it. If you were bowling, Bob was the best at it. If you're golfing, Bob was the best at it. And once he got the feel for playing on our team, and that was a big adjustment for him. There were some bumps in the road, but by 1992, Bob was the best player at Nashville. He was incredible.
And so there were so many other more talented players. Again, if I had more time, we break down the whole roster player by player. But what do you think overall the lasting legacy of that team is? As much as we talked about the Empire, the history of New York Ultimate is rich.
Well, I think that from what I have the most respect for in terms of our team was the work ethic and the hunger we had, even though we were winning. So it's really hard to stay on top when you're on top and everybody wants to beat you. And we really went into every season with a bunch of goals, whether it was, bringing in new plays or new defensive schemes, but we stayed very innovative. And that innovation and that work was more an internal thing of us wanting to be better and better and play the game better. It wasn't necessarily that we needed to win. We really wanted to be as good as we could every single year. And it was exhausting. And I think that's why we kind of burned out at the end. Because we sacrificed a lot to do that. And then it had run its course.
But 7 years of dominance or 6 years of dominance plus one in the middle it's a long time. It definitely, obviously, on family and everything behind the scenes.
I don't know. I've never heard anyone from Boston speak on this, but I personally feel very sure that if New York hadn't existed and had our run, Boston would not have had theirs. They might have been much more satisfied with a championship or two, but we'd set a bar, and they wanted to. That was in the back of their mind.
Yeah, and as you said, now bringing this all the way up to modern day, that the Empire are the defending champs, so the hardest thing to do is have that fight, have that drive when you're the ones on top. But fortunately for the New York Empire, they do have assistant coach in David Blau, who has done it before. And David, this was your first time on the podcast, but you've been in media before. So again, maybe some of your players can take a hint or two from you as well in this venue. So thanks so much for coming on the show and talking about all things New York Ultimate.
It's a pleasure.
All right, again, that is David Blau, and I want to thank you too, the listeners, as we wrap up another edition of the New York Empire podcast. Then the entire New York Empire family, I'm Ben Hilton, and we'll talk to you soon.